So hello everyone, welcome to Satsang. Let's make some silence first. Silence, stillness. Body stillness, emotional stillness, mental stillness. Silence. Absence of motion, physical motion, mental motion, emotional motion. I see. Okay. So today we're going to talk about suffering. As you are, as you don't know who you are, as you're not self-realized, your life is, there's not much of new about it, because it is lived in circles. Small circles, big circles, doesn't matter. What does this mean, circles? It is about having more or less the same experiences. It is a journey towards suffering. Consciously, it's the opposite. You think that you're looking for happiness and all of that, but it isn't. It is suffering that comes again and again and again and again. It starts with aspiration for happiness in whatever way you imagine it, following it's not but those images of happiness that you have, those circumstances that you fathom that will bring happiness. So it starts with these images, with the hope of achieving them, of achieving that happiness, and then it ends in suffering and frustration because it was not possible. So as hope begins, suffering ends and hope begins, you know that you are starting a new cycle. And as you reach that intense suffering, where all these visions, where there is frustration about these visions, the sense that you have failed to achieve them, end of that cycle. Then you go through a period there, without any hopes, completely in despair, at the bottom of the pit. And then slowly, that hope starts to renew itself, to reappear, to make your head move up, and to start again one more cycle. And as hope is renewed, it seems that this time there is a chance. But a chance for what? For that happiness? No. A chance to repeat the same suffering. Different circumstances or same circumstances, doesn't matter. Same suffering. It may seem pessimist, but it isn't. It's quite realistic. And without understanding this, it is very difficult to come out from those cycles. And you may imagine that if you understand the science behind of it, then you're able to come out of it. But that's not really the case. If you understand the science of it, if you understand these cycles, if you understand that there's nothing new, that your time is being used just to maintain suffering, then if you understand this, you may reach the point that having the opportunity opportunity, fruit of hard work. To get out from this cycle, you may have a chance to get out from that cycle. But that will be difficult because you will see clearly that you don't want to let go of that cycle. And you think you're just bound by your images of happiness or security, whatever your happiness means, because at some level of the cycle, that happiness means just security, guaranteeing security. And at other levels, it means prosperity. So it depends on where you are, on the level of desperation of a lot of things. And in the middle of that, coming across the opportunity of leaving your cycle of suffering, you will see clearly that you don't want to let go. But you only can see this clearly when you stop giving excuses, when you stop holding on to those images of happiness. Either they mean security, because sometimes it's not about prosperity. It's not about achieving the best possible. Sometimes it's about avoiding the worst possible. But it's the same. Either whatever reason is there holding you back, it is your desire to maintain your suffering. So whatever you're doing, in your best of intentions, understand, it is about securing suffering. Not any kind of suffering, your kind of suffering. What suffering means for you. And it has to increase and decrease a little bit so that the kick is the same. It's an addiction. There are 3 videos about suffering in YouTube, in the channel, in a series which is Unleash, something about the sacred fires, unraveling or unleashing, something like this. Well, it's on YouTube. And it talks about in depth about this. So this is about your suffering. You see, because there's a correlation with your suffering and what you call your visions of happiness. One without the other, they don't make sense. If there's no suffering there, no point in those visions of happiness. They become useless. It's like offering food to someone who has his stomach full. He will not be attracted. And without those visions of happiness, how could you suffer also? If there's no aspiration for nothing, so whatever is there is normal and it's fine. So they sustain each other. And without this suffering, this future aspiration would not be possible. So where would be the need to invest, to do things, to go after this and that? Where would be the need for movement? There won't be. So suffering and those images of happiness that promise happiness, they are what sets the whole circus into motion. And they change. They are bound. They form the cycle. So as you are running after your images of happiness, you are running really after your suffering of choice. And there's a reason for this. There's a reason, or probably several reasons, but let us just focus. It is what you know. It is what makes you aspire, and it is what you know. And it's very difficult. It's very humanly difficult, not impossible, but difficult to walk a path you don't know. So when you look at what you call your reality, all that you are aspiring to, the best that you are aspiring to, and the worst that you're running away from, that you really don't want, they are all precious. And I can guarantee you that that which you're running from, that you really don't want, is even much more precious than that which you aspire to. For a number of reasons. The beliefs you have about yourself, about the world, and all of this. So whatever is there that you're suffering from, well, the one who is completely lost in the middle of what he calls his life, completely dragged by the impulses that arise, he quickly jumps to the conclusion, oh, others are to blame for. Someone is there harming me. This leads nowhere. It's just continue to walk blindfolded. But if you look at whatever you're suffering from or have suffered for, and you ask yourself, why do I need this suffering? You might start getting some answers. But like everything, you see, releasing yourself from suffering needs much more than just mental processes. They are important, relatively important, but they are not the solution for it. They don't change much. What you need is strong resolution. Strong resolution to make a difference. I hear lots of times seekers saying, I can't take it anymore from life, from this suffering. But that's not usually the case. It doesn't matter in which point of despair they are. That's just blowing some steam off. Nothing different. Because those who are really, really fed up with it, their actions speak for themselves. But it is very difficult to walk a road that is unknown to you. It is terrifying. For some, it is unbearable. You see, because deep down, when you're in that pit of suffering, something tells you, I knew it. You didn't reach your visions of happiness. You're in complete despair. But there's something there that says, I knew it. It was too good to be true. And with that comes, there's something there that gets relief out of this. The hates that you have accumulated, they would become useless in the presence of happiness. And you're attached to hating. It gives you a lot of excuses in your life. So whatever harm it's being done, whatever that means for you, it is a necessary harm because it supports, it justifies a lot of things that you're doing. You can go into the big things, hope, despair, despair, hope, and you can go to details. Every action, every set of actions have a justification, something that you need to be able to live with them. And those who are attached to intense suffering, well, they have a better chance because they can see it clearly. They will be able to see it, but that doesn't solve anything. Like I said, it has to be through strong resolution, through devotion, through surrender. Because it is walking through an unknown path. It is very complicated, that. And this is visible. Some of you have seen this already. For those who have started serious spiritual work, confusion and pain starts to arise because, well, if there's no sacrifice, if there's no letting go of attachments or whatever, that's not real spiritual work. It's just another walk through La La Land. So when it starts seriously, suffering starts. For those who are immensely attached to suffering, they can take it because, well, it is known, and they start to adapt it to their own cycles and feeding from that. But eventually, if guidance is there and it being directed, they will start getting into a place where that suffering has no place anymore. Even the circumstances start to become more and more difficult for them to extract that suffering. And this is when they give up. First, anxiety starts to come. They will try first in the beginning to twist those circumstances and continue to try to extract. They will see things in a very specific way that it is visible that it has nothing to do with the real circumstances. And when that fails, they start to become anxious, suffocated. And this is usually where they give up. So for the worldly person, it is obvious what it is doing. It is just maintaining the cycles of suffering in automatic. Their decisions reflect this all the time. For a seeker of truth, or someone who aspires to be a seeker of truth, these things are the decisions are not that different, especially in the beginning. It's just about a different set of circumstances. Well, in the end, circumstances are circumstances. Doesn't matter if they appear different. It's just circumstances. But for the one who aspires to become a seeker of truth, there's the element of the divine in that equation. But the quest will be the same. You will try to extract that suffering from that circumstance. In different ways. Same goals, same needs. Whatever guidance he receives, he adapts that guidance. His understanding filters and adapts to his own needs. And then eventually, he gave up. It takes time to see this clearly. It takes a lot of spiritual work. But eventually, if things are in the right place, if surrender is there, devotion is there, if guidance is there and you're following guidance, eventually you will be exposed to those circumstances you so much aspire to. Or you'll be exposed to a circumstance where you cannot extract your suffering. In the first case, there will be rejection of those circumstances because there was an expectation that they would not be fulfilled, because it supports your whole world, the existence of that character. You want it, you aspired it intensely, but you really don't want it to happen. And in the presence of it, and this is only with a lot of work, because usually you don't get there, or when you're getting close, that image changes and becomes more distant again. But in the presence of that, you will see the rejection of it. An intense need to sabotage that, so that your world can maintain its harmony. And the harmony of your world is with those opposites that reach always to the same point. You go for a walk outside, you go through the same path, and you come back through the same path. Nothing new. Mechanical, lifeless. And this is what you need to make sure that continues. And it is the most common. The person which is looking at its own life, at life events, sometimes its interpretations are so far out, but they are for a reason, because that is what that person needs to see for its own world to make sense. And when finally guidance comes, when it comes, that guidance, as I explained previously, not the one that you fantasize, oh, I'm being guided, or I feel like I'm being guided. It is like there, straight, direct guidance. Then it is an opportunity to see you're being tested. Is all that effort that you have done, because without it, guidance doesn't come. Well, sometimes it does, but it goes into the same category. And eventually, tests will be there, and we'll see if it continues. But imagine that for the normal situations, what is more common? For guidance to appear directly, some work must have been done. And then it will be seen. It will be given the opportunity to see if all that work has the potential for freedom, for the quest for freedom, or if it is just still for the maintenance of its own suffering. And test after test after test, eventually things will go down in such a way that it will be clear. And usually, you see, a common person avoids suffering, immediate suffering. It's not really avoiding that suffering, it's guaranteeing that it will find that suffering much more intense and in a situation that it cannot run away from it. So it avoids immediate suffering to embrace long-term suffering, recurrent suffering. And when the spiritual work starts for real, suffering will start arising immediately. It's like it starts to empty the bag of suffering. The other is filling the bag of suffering, increasing it. So the common person avoids this immediate suffering. Oh, it's difficult. Oh, I find something easier and easier. It moves like this. The seeker of truth knows. The seeker of truth, the aspiring one, is trying to learn. But the seeker of truth knows that it is the way to empty the stock of own suffering. It is to let it arise, experiencing it, and letting it go. And as the more still he becomes, he remains, the more suffering can be purged like this. It will be lived and experienced. Sometimes it is almost unbearable. But this is the way to empty the stock of your suffering. But the common one runs from this experience as it comes. So the one who is in spirituality, with the same purposes of maintaining its own suffering, as this suffering starts, you will give up, continue to look for a better place, a better way. But that really means a way that can guarantee future suffering, intense one. But this he doesn't know. He believes in the narrative. He can still take a lot of suffering, yes, depending on the greed which is there. The greed for self-realization. Because beginning, there may be the calling, there is the calling for the seeker of truth, but part of it is greed for the character. It's normal. So it can take up to a point. And this will depend but then if whatever is happening is touching the core of the character, threatening it, then it drops it. It drops it with the excuse of avoiding suffering, renewing those images of happiness, circumstantial happiness, and he goes back. Make no mistake about it. The biggest difficulty in letting go of suffering is because you don't want to. Despite the fact you have been saying that that's the only thing you really want to, is to be happy. But reality doesn't stand by it. And observe, your actions don't reflect that. Because eventually you find yourself in that same suffering. Yeah, different circumstances. But the core experience, same. Only differentiates in intensity. It has to, because if it didn't, it would become normal for you. You would get used to it no matter how intense it is. It would become normal. So this is why it needs to fluctuate, to continue to cause impact, to continue to impress you, to continue to keep you distracted. And this is quite common. A seeker, under guidance, following guidance, as he is experiencing suffering from the experiences and the spiritual quest and all of this, he can still manage it. The fruits are there, the fruits of suffering. So it is there, it is suffering. At the conscious level, the seeker thinks, I don't want this, I want to get rid of this. But at the deeper level, oh, things are nice. Suffering is here, so harmony is being maintained. But eventually, if this is the fruit of being under guidance, the day that that suffering has no place starts to dawn ahead. And even before it is seen by the seeker, all defenses against it starts to rise. And eventually, what was surrendered to guidance, it is interrupted. Because, well, first it seemed that I was being taken where I wanted to be. But now it's not the case. Of course, it's not intellectual. And it doesn't matter how much it is explained, how much of this is made conscious to that seeker. If suffering is what he really wants, it won't make a difference. And then, as he finds himself into the suffering, his known suffering, the thing he wanted to avoid most, but the thing he wanted most, after breaking with guidance, after breaking with everything, to be in that place, he will be there for a time, into those muddy waters of its own suffering, and then hope starts appearing again. Something, a direction for him to start again, another cycle of the same thing. And nothing new, just same old, same old. Because the one who is looking for freedom, he is stuck to these things, but he will not break with guidance. If in the end it is put on the scale, or you follow guidance, or guidance ends. If he chooses guidance, then, despite being trapped by all the same things, there is potential for freedom. There is aspiration for freedom. But when it puts on the scale, and knowingly where he is going to, and what he is leaving behind, and he chooses to break with guidance, that's not a seeker of truth. Just a worldly person in a spiritual context, and that makes that context worldly, because there's lack of real aspiration for freedom. Consciously, nobody wants that, of course. But it's not your words, not your affirmations that make a difference. Your actions. What you decide. What you stand for. This is what really represents. Without knowing all those mechanisms, you won't stand a chance. You get to know them by intense spiritual disciplines, meditation. I will speak only about this because in these days, this is the most needed, especially for those who are beyond meditation. But don't believe me, well, time is yours. You have to test it, whatever that means. But it's an important resource. So in the end, what defines a seeker of truth? The one that will always have guidance is the one who really doesn't abandon guidance. And in a way, each and every seeker will have to come to that point. And the seekers of truth will make always the same decision. And it's a difficult one. The aspiration for freedom must be big. The understanding that judgment is clouded and that you are trapped in those opposites of your hope and your despair, and as you are moved as a puppet with this, the vision that you really don't know where you're going, why you're going, what the hell is that for? The vision that only the divine can guide you out of it. And all of these visions are difficult to achieve. Not impossible, of course not. They just take focus, complete focus, undivided attention to achieve. Without it, taking care of a lot of subjects at the same time, well, that's practically impossible. So for those who are addicted to suffering, and it's not like drugs, it's beyond that, because it is the pillars, the foundation of their character. And that's deep. It really is, more than words can convey. So for those who are addicted to suffering, well, the only thing that can release them apart from common sense is suffering. So that is why suffering is not really a punishment. It is a blessing, because eventually, with time, it will become unbearable. Sometimes it will destroy you life after life, until common sense dawns in your mind. You understand that a lot of those beliefs you had make no sense, until you reach the point that you're ready to, when guidance comes into your life, you will hold on to it no matter what happens. If you're following your ideas about freedom, understand this. You're being played, and you're just looking for the maintenance of your suffering. The proof is there in front of you. You just need to identify these cycles, and you will see the beginning and the end, and how it's repeating itself, confirming your beliefs, your inner, deeper beliefs, the real ones about yourself and the world. Your aspirations, by contrast, they reveal the suffering you are addicted to. Knowing one is to know the other. For a common person, for example, it is quite common to see majority of people, talk about the majority of them, suffering, a purposeless life, no meaning, doing things that they don't like, having to get up every day and go to a work that they don't like, just because of security, of that paycheck. So they spend a whole life suffering for this, for example, to avoid the suffering of losing security. If there was any rationale involved in that, they could see, for example, oh, that person does, for example, what I would like to do, for those who know what would be, for example, and it's still getting the paycheck. So there's a paycheck in a lot of things, but this is not something rational. It's just about imprisonment and maintaining suffering with the hopes of happiness. Because if there wasn't any hope for happiness, suffering would disappear. It would become normal. So for a common person, it usually says that hope is the last thing that dies, and that's a good thing. Where in the spiritual grounds, it's not such a good thing, because as hope is not dead, those cycles don't end. So in spirituality, in the quest for truth, yes, hope is still the last one to die, but it dies. But it dies eventually. With a lot of work, with stop feeding it, it will eventually die. And as you are still walking something which is inbuilt, known, that's not really yet. When you start walking a path which is unknown, no security anywhere, this is where you start having a chance. Of course, illusion, the world, will come at you and will try to scare you. You're not feeling safe. There's no security anywhere, and it'll do boo for you to run away to my safe place. But if you hold your grounds, hold on to guidance, it will be unavoidable. These days, we see spiritual teachings being shared in a way like it is an afternoon tea, with herbal tea, for example, and sweets, a lot of sweets that you eat at the tea. Well, there's not much nutrition in that, just full of sugar. Not much nutrition. It is more or less the same. And it is a common thing these days, but it's not very old, just a few decades. But if you look back to the spiritual traditions that come from India, because they have the best records of it, they have kept that treasure for humanity. You can see the stories of saints and sages, their lives, how they went. You're not seeing everything, of course, because they didn't write it down. Someone else did. And the one who was writing doesn't know everything. And it puts a little bit of itself there, embellishes the story. But still, the marks are there. And these days, I can guarantee you this. Spiritually speaking, that which sounds sweet actually is quite bitter in the long run. And that which sounds bitter can really be actually sweet in the long run, or can just be bitter. Well, chance is always there. But sweet being sweet, meaning self-realization, without the removal or experience, because they come together, of your own chaos and suffering, no can do. And suffering, for it to be possible, it needs certain conditions, certain beliefs, that you are small, that you are everything you believe about yourself. And that it isn't true, of course. As you grow, the same experiences that would cause tremendous suffering will be almost nothing, because you have outgrown them. You have shaken the power they had over you. So the seeker of truth distrusts what comes in his mind. He questions a lot. He spends a lot of time in observing his motivations, the pulsions that arise, that impels him to act. He will look with the devil's eye, trying to see what does the character has to win with this. Because a big part of the spiritual work is taking the food out of the character's mouth. By questioning, by observing, putting things into check, instead of believing everything that comes and the excuses that comes with it, then you will understand the mechanics of its own delusion. And what will this help? It will increase stillness. It will increase the investments in actions that promote slavery, bondage, and it will increase those actions or the absence of actions that lead to liberation. Maybe this was confusing. Let's make it simple. It will increase the actions that lead to liberation. It's not really like this, but it will be more simple to understand. Okay, so for today, that's it. If you have any questions about this, either now or whenever you're watching this, you can send to that number that appears there. Not sure if it stays after in Instagram, in the comments of YouTube, Facebook, it will remain, I think. So, but whatever you're seeing this, in the website, in the pages, in the media, there is the number. You can send your questions. I will answer them in the next satsang, whenever that is. So until then, reflect, use your time in the best way possible. And don't trust everything that comes out of there. Just because it is appearing in that which you call your intimate space, it doesn't mean it is yours, true and valid. Okay. Watch.